Okay, it looks like we are just about live, which is really exciting. Ladies and gentlemen, I am extremely excited to announce. My titles are wrong. Let me just fix that up real quick. Sorry, guys. That does happen. I knew I'd missed something tonight. There you go. Let me get something wrong, aren't I? Okay, that's cool. Okay, we are live. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning in. I know the title said something wrong there. It said the wrong name. I'm very sorry, but you know what's going on because you guys get the schedule. I really appreciate you all tuning in, for being a part of this live stream, being a part of coming in every single night and having some great questions, because that's what it's about. It's about getting together with like-minded members, friends, colleagues, family, loved ones, etc., and having a good time, having a few drinks, and asking a few questions. Pardon me. If I haven't introduced myself yet, my name is Matt Bailey. I'm the National Ambassador of the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, with a bit of beer gas going on at the moment, so I'll try and keep that out of the microphone. And I'll take this opportunity now to please welcome Dom Roskrow, renowned author, editor, consultant, Mr. Dom Roskrow. Welcome to the channel. Thank you so much.
Hello, Australia. Are you okay?
Yeah, Australia's doing pretty good. I mean, we're coming out of starting to come out of lockdowns, and it's gatherings of up to 5 or 10 or something for Sydney is starting to happen now.
Yeah, I saw that the Super Rugby teams in New Zealand are going to start playing behind closed doors anytime now. So desperately keen to start seeing some live sport. I don't know. It's driving me absolutely crazy. I'm watching things for the 5th time, and I know the results and everything. It's not the same. So, yeah, lucky you. We're not quite there yet. We're pretending we're doing really well, and we're not. So,
yeah, I mean, it's the goalposts down here are moving so quickly. It's kind of like keeping track of who's what and everything, and which sports are allowed, and which state by it's us also state by state making recommendations which are different from the federal recommendations at the moment. So it's kind of a bit of a mess, to be honest. But I guess it's all live and learn at the moment. So
yeah, absolutely. We've got this weird situation where they've started regionalising it, and the statistics for London are a lot worse for anywhere else. It's 87 per 100,000 people are dying. In London, 32 in Leicester, which is where I'm originally from, out of 100,000. But here in Norwich, it's 5 out of 100,000. But the trouble with that is a lot of Norfolk is holiday homes, and the worst thing that could happen now is people say, "Oh, Norfolk's a good place to go because it's low on virus," and then driving out of places where it's bad. So we've got all that happening in the Lake District at the moment. So yeah, trying times, but there you go.
Yeah, well, I mean, on a more positive note, I might just ask you to have a chat with us about you, like, for those who are at the society, for those who are tuned in right now, who might not know your story, who might not know what you do or who you are. This is a really cool opportunity for you to say hello and give us an idea of what it means to be a whiskey author and some of your background about how that came about.
Yeah, the truth be told, I've just been incredibly lucky. What I've always said to people about whiskey, for me, is that anybody could do it. If I could do it, anybody could. I'm not one of these people with an amazing palate and that's got some form of special skills. I'm fairly average at that stuff, and I'm fairly average at the writing stuff, but I can bring the two together, and I've just been lucky. So my background is I was trained as a journalist in England. I emigrated to New Zealand in '87, and I took out New Zealand citizenship. And what I used to do, I used to be a music writer, so I basically did what I do now, only with musicians rather than whiskey drinkers. And basically, too many late nights in hotels, talking crap with people that I'd never met before, and bonding over a few drams. I've been doing that pretty much all my career. And when I came back from New Zealand, then it was a recession. And I ended up getting a job as on a drinks title, just writing about the drinks trade, about the pub trade, the club trade.
When were you in New Zealand? What year are we talking here?
New Zealand, 87 to 91. Yeah, so I went there when New Zealand were Rugby World Cup champions, and they didn't win it again until quite recently. That's the mark of me. That's what I do. So yeah, so I came back 91 and I just went through the drinks trade. Basically, I did trade journalism, trade writing, and eventually I was living up in Norfolk and working away. I was away a week in London because of the work, and it wasn't great for family life. And one day, my wife contacted me when I was away saying that the Whiskey magazine had been in touch. There was a group of magazines, but their big one was Whiskey magazine based in Norwich, which is where I live, or near to where I live. So would I be interested in doing that? And I took over as editor, knowing very, very little about whiskey. I could tell you the percentage of share market, etc. This is about 2002, 2003. And that's what I've done ever since. I was very, very lucky though, because firstly, my consulting editors were the legendary Michael Jackson, and Dave Broom, who was the up and coming young fireball, you know, and he had exactly my attitude to life in terms of we're both what you'd call we're influenced by gonzo journalism, if you like. There's a story that Lester Bangs once went on stage and played typewriter with some band live, and it was gonzo journalism is really when you put yourself into the story, so you write around an experience that you're part of, as opposed to being a journalist standing away and observing, which is what traditional journalism is.
I don't want to say gonzo journalism has almost, in many ways, I think has died out a lot. I mean, with Lester Bangs is a good example, but like it's in that era of journalism. I think you don't see too much of that anymore these days.
You don't know, and and there is a certain self-indulgence. It's always been a fine line between saying this is an experience that I'm having and come and share it with me, and saying this is an experience that I'm having and you can't. It's a very fine line. So saying I've tried a whiskey that is no longer available, it's the best whiskey I've ever had, all you're doing is telling people no. So gonzo journalism in that sense is, but having said that, it creates anecdotes and stories, and to me, it's about bringing experience to people. It's interesting talking about Australia particularly, because people are fascinated over here about what's happening over there, but that's because they can't experience it firsthand, and an awful lot of it isn't coming up here because the demand is so high down there, and as a result there's a fascination with it. But vice versa, when I started writing about whiskey, two things. One, I wanted to start writing about places that weren't written about because it was my unique selling point. So what I call New World whiskey. And two, at that time, if you said to an Australian, you're making some really great, Lark is making some interesting whiskey, Sullivan's Code is making some interesting, they wouldn't have had it. You know, 15 years ago, 17 years ago, that wasn't the case. And so I was in this, you know, the first time I went to Kentucky, I was interviewed by television because they couldn't understand why a British journalist would want to come and write about bourbon. They didn't get it. And if you look at what's happened to bourbon in that 15 years, it's phenomenal. You go to Louisville now, it's everywhere.
Yeah. And that is a fascinating point, especially if you're talking local scene about that as well, because that's changed. Or perception has changed, but also quality has changed a lot in the last 10, 15 years. In fact, I'd go so far to say it's changed a lot in the last 5.
I totally agree, without a doubt. I mean, I was down in Tasmania maybe 8 years ago, and it's unrecognizable now. In fact, I'm very sad that I was meant to be down in August for the Tasmanian Festival, and that's not going to happen.
We were both supposed to be on the same panel, by the way. Did you know that?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And hopefully they'll return to it next year, because I'm desperate to get back to Australia. Well, obviously not. I'm being broad. It'll be Tasmania, but I'm, you know, there's so much happening, and I keep in touch with what's going on. But it's impossible to actually rule. When it was 15, 17 years ago, really nobody was doing it. Jim Murray did it in his Whiskey Bible, but nobody was talking about world whiskey anywhere outside the 5 or 6 traditional areas. And then it got to the point where I just flew with all this work. It was amazing. And then it's reached the point now where no one person, there are people in there's a journalist in France who knows France better than I do, and that's just down the road for me. And there are obviously people who are doing really well with Australian promotion and know masses more than me because it's so big now. But that's great. That's great.
And we're even seeing that the result of that locally. I know this is a bit of a tangent, but it's true. We are seeing the result of that locally with the amount of even journalism locally that we're seeing from local people. I could even name off the top of my head like Luke McCarthy, and there's some great writers. I mean, there's probably half a dozen. I'm not recalling the names of right this very second, who are writing great content. Of course, even our own cellar master, I should say, Andrew Durbidge, who writes Whiskey and Wisdom, writing about local scene and local content. And I think that's hugely important because as I said, the scene changes so quickly. But on your point of Tasmania, have you had much experience on the mainland? There's a lot happening in mainland whiskey production now, of course, in Australia.
Yeah, there is. It's such a. I mean, I haven't been to distilleries on the mainland. I'm still in touch with David Vitale at Starwood. I'm going to be working with him again later this year. I've been asked to hopefully join a company where Starwood was one of the whiskies distributors over here, but I haven't spoken to David Baker, but David Baker came to stay with me.
Yep.
I obviously know the bigger distilleries on the mainland, but but I can't claim to be I'm not on top of it at all. I'm glad you mentioned Luke though, because when I was editing Whiskey Quarterly, I really hope that I'll be able to work with him again, because he wrote one of the best stories I've ever had the pleasure to publish as an editor. And it was about a trip to Japan and finding a rare Australian whiskey on a back shelf very late at night. And he saw this bottle and he recognized it, which in itself is amazing because it was from some distillery that had closed in the 1920s. And there's this bottle out there, and he'd only seen a picture of it. And he calls the barman, the manager, the owner, who didn't speak English. And he signaled and they made it. And they got this bottle down and it was unopened. And Luke tells this story about the guy, typical Japanese hospitality. He offered it to him. And Luke said, I can't do that. But I tell you what I will do. I'll bring a translator. You bring some friends. And we'll meet at a time and we'll open the bottle and drink it together. And that's what he did. He wrote this feature about this distillery that had been shut for the better part of 100 years.
Yeah, wow.
And there's a bottle in it, and it's, for me, it was up there with discovering a original Elvis Presley vinyl album in a bookshop, in a record shop. I love all that kind of browsing, and again, when you said about gonzo journalism sort of not being there anymore, neither is the beauty of looking through old record shops. I've just done a jigsaw during lockdown, which is a 1970s record shop with all the old Lou Reeds and the Beatles and Elvis. And it was the best jigsaw I've ever done. I do a lot of jigsaws and that's my favorite. But this Luke story was just absolutely out there. And if he's listening in or anybody knows him, send him my very best regards, because I'd love to work with him again.
I know Luke quite well, and I'll send your best. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Lovely guy, and he was quite involved with Whiskey and Helmet for a number of years as well as a bar in Melbourne. And he's a tremendous bartender and knowledgeable guy on all fronts. So, Luke, if you're watching or if you watch this later, mate, big shout out.
One other thing. Could I just say one other thing about that too? One of the things that I often talk about Sweden and Australia, when people say to me, what's world whiskey about? I say it's about lots and lots of things, but I'll give the example of Sweden and Australia because they're very, very different. And what I loved about dealing with Australia was that you get Tim at Hartwood.
Oh,
Tim
yeah.
Duckett. The guy is, to me, it's like facing an Australian bowling attack. He's bowling down these really heavy hitting whiskies and trying to knock your head off. And it's a real kind of, and he basically, it's an Australian thing. If they see a statue, if you see a statue, you don't say, oh, there's a nice statue. You say, why shouldn't I knock it over? What are the rules saying that I can't change that? Yeah. And what you've got is very much the Australian spirit of youth and enthusiasm. The other person I've got to mention is Alex, who you had on last week. Love that girl. I think she's fabulous. But I think it's great.
She's watching in right now. So Alex, you heard it here first, and she already commented, "Dom, that beard is so incredible on you."
Means this.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had the pleasure of spending some time with Jeanette Powers and Alex in Portland, Oregon last year. And it was a blast. It was an absolute blast. But I'm aware of the bars she does, the work that's going on across Australia. It's just phenomenal. And all power to you. I think it's great.
Yeah, amazing. There's actually a question that has come through. There's so many things I want to touch on in what you've just said, but there is a question that's just come through. Keenan asks, is there a distillery that inspired you more than any other when it came to your writing?
When it came to my writing.
Good question, Keenan. Good question.
Yeah, I think on a general level, I'll say I think the attention to detail of distilleries is always incredibly impressive. I always think it's amazing that you get treated like some form of star because you're writing about these people, but all you are the little fish that feed off the great white shark. The great white shark is the industry, the distilleries, the distillery managers, all the rest of it, and we're feeding on the back of that shark, swimming in that direction. And I feel we're given far too much respect when they're the guys who are doing everything that's special. We're just living off them. But there are several places that I've been inspired really. I remember the first time I ever went to Maker's Mark, just a perfect distillery and everything. And at the time, I stayed at Bill Samuels' house, one of the most amazing experiences I've had in my life. But talking to Bill Samuels is like talking to or listening to a badly tuned old-fashioned radio. So you're listening to your favorite song and it comes in strong and then it goes and fades when it's gone. And that's Bill. His attention span, he's dyslexic, and his attention span is 0. It's like you even get 20 seconds of concentration off, but he's just absolutely, his thinking is just, it's absolutely dyslexic. He puts everything back in the wrong order. And as a result, he has these amazingly crazy ideas and stories, and you never know if he's telling you the truth. So, but just everything about Maker's Mark was fantastic. And in Scotland, there's two probably that really stand out for me because I absolutely adore them, and that's Highland Park and Ardbeg. And I know Alex was telling a story about doing the malt floors, etc. All of that stuff. When you get right down to the magic of it, and if you've ever had the pleasure of going to Ardbeg, it's so, half the time it just doesn't feel like it should work, and yet it produces this incredible whiskey. So they'd be the ones I would mention off the top of my head. There's others that I really, really love. I mean, if people say to me, what are the best tours you've ever done? I'd say Buffalo Trace. The Hard Hat tour at Buffalo Trace is just off the scale. And it's an amazingly historical and almost sacred place. It's at a point on the river where the river narrows and goes very, very shallow. So the buffalo used to come through there to pass over the river. So they would take 3 days to cross because there's so many of them. The buffalo used to take 3 days to cross. Yeah. There's a brilliant book called Bury My Heart of Wounded Knee or something like that. The author has done 2 books, and they're on the history of the Native American tribes that lived on the back of that. And of course, there's a clash because when we arrived, the white man arrived, we built a fort right next to the crossing point. But that's where the Native American Indians would come to hunt because the buffalo had slowed down. So that's why it's called Buffalo Trace. So there was this conflict between the pioneer.
I absolutely never knew that about Buffalo Trace as a name.
Yeah. And it's on the Kentucky River, which joins the so it's on the Kentucky River, which joins the Ohio River, which eventually joins the Mississippi. So it's a little juncture. But you get, if you know that stuff, and they've got these amazing photographs in there where showing the workers back in the 1800s, and they had a lot of black workers. You always think of America being very segregated, etc. But at that time, black and white work together. It's just everything about Buffalo Trace as an experience. And the other two are Balvenie, because Balvenie's half-day tour.
That's the one I did. Yeah, I did the half-day tour at Balvenie in would have been about 2012 for 2011, 2012, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. And even being able to obviously like the malting floor and everything is fantastic, and the whole sort of experience of the even taking the little car over to Caninvie and exploring through Caninvie a bit was sort of like, oh, look at this, is amazing. I've got to say, I'm so glad you said Balvenie, because I've always rated their premium tour, whatever they call it now, but the half day, the big one is fantastic. I remember thinking at the time it was quite expensive because it was something like 120 pounds or something like that, or maybe not that much. But it was up there. I remember being like, oh, that's a lot more than most tours kind of cost. And but I remember just thinking, oh, you know what? It's how often am I in Dufton that I can just go, yeah, okay, So yeah.
Fabulous. And the other one, although I'm not massively a fan of the whiskey, I'd be a liar if I said I was, but I don't dislike it, but it's not a favorite. But that's Abelard. But the reason I mentioned Abelard, because again, firstly, they employ young tour guides who are not on script. So unlike some distilleries where they get students in and they teach them and you ask them anything that's not on a piece of paper they've learned from, they haven't a clue. At Abelard, they seem to have people who've got an opinion on anything. You want to talk about the term pure malt as opposed to blended malt, then these guys will just go off on one. But also, I always say that a tour should teach you something you didn't know. And every single time, I must have done a tour at Abelard 6-7 times. Every single time they teach me something new. The last time I went, they did this amazing thing. They had 4 samples. One was right at the beginning of the distillation, second distillation. So very, very high strength alcohol in one. Second one was taken from the middle. The third was taken as the average of what they were actually going to save. And the final one was the dregs, the tails.
Yeah.
And they said, don't, whatever you do, taste the first one, but nose all 4. And the first one didn't smell of anything. And the second one smelled of, fruity and what you'd expect for a Speyside malt. And then by the end, you'd got this serially not very nice thing. They said, now add water. And you add water. And that first one became a viper's nest.
Yeah.
It had all these evil, poisonous alcohols. You wouldn't have gone near it because that's what it is. It's poison. But because of the strength of the alcohol, that hides the flavor. And it was the most revealing thing. It was like, whoa.
Yeah.
And then you realize the power of water to let out aromas in whiskey and spirit. Brilliant. But Abelard always surprised. And I really rate their tours.
I actually had one of the most surprising tours at Abelard myself. I've toured the distillery twice, not nearly as many times as you have. And one of the most amazing parts for me was how the guy I was sitting next to, who I went with on the tour, Jim Coleman, lovely bloke, and he runs the Angel's Glass or something in Scotland. I'll have to look it up. Sorry, but he used to work for SMWS as a tour guide at SMWS as a host. And he took me to Abelard because his name's on the wall in the visitors room as someone who's a Bunad Founders Club or something on the wall, and he wanted to show me that, and I thought that was great. And then the tour sort of left the tasting room, and sort of the end of the tour at the tasting room, and now you can go to the sort of the gift shop at the front of the distillery there. And he sort of waited for everyone to wander off, and he goes, "All right, come with me," and he takes me up the back of the distillery. And there's those water rocks. It's the water filtration over the rocks up the back there. And they don't include that as part of the tour. And he said, oh, they won't mind me being here. They know who I am. But come up here and have a look at this. And we opened the door to each one, and there was all this, the water filtration of these giant rock formations that they use. And I thought that's a fascinating part. And I don't know why they don't include it, but it's one of those sort of interesting parts of the distillery. It's like mossy rocks and water spraying everywhere, and it looks fantastic.
Incredible. Yeah, brilliant.
I'm going to grab some of these comments coming in, some of the questions as well. Scott Mansfield says, Dominic, you've written about the re-emerging whiskey scene in New Zealand. Have you tasted the Thompson Manuka smoked? As someone who grew up in the New Zealand country, this whiskey is incredibly evocative. Have you found any new old whiskies which strike you as being reflective of their origins? That's a really good question. Thanks, Scott.
It is a very good question. The answer to the first part is Mark Thompson. I was in touch with him when I used to do an online magazine about New World whiskey. And I was desperate when I started writing about whiskey, I was desperate to find a good story for New Zealand. and at that time there wasn't one. You know, it was Wilson's, and it was just not great.
Yeah.
But then Mark was one of the first. Mark was one of the, if not the first, to start distilling commercially with his partner. Who's so sorry, I can't remember her name. And I did taste the Manuka smoke, but it was basically, I think it was even new make. It was very young, and I certainly haven't tasted it in recent years. So, and I've tried to contact Mark on occasion, but without great success. So yes, I have, and I agree with him. I think it's fantastic. I'm also really impressed with, the second part of the question was, do things evoke?
Have you found any new old whiskies that strike you as being reflective of their origin or evoke a sense of place?
I think that staying for New Zealand for a second, the New Zealand Whiskey Company, Greg Ramsey, who's from Tasmania.
Yep.
He had the foresight to take some pretty ordinary whiskey and put it into New Zealand red wine casks, and he's created some really special whiskies. But I tell you what I would mention is an SMWS one. The SMWS, the Scottish Whisky Society, did. You'll know this. They did a Penderyn cask strength. Well, all cask strength. I know that. So it's Penderyn port cask finish whiskey.
I know exactly which cask you're talking about as well. Oh, I remember that whiskey. There's a story behind that for me as well. But go ahead.
Well, do you know, I did a tasting where when the All Blacks were on tour, we took New Zealand whiskies to England, Scotland, and Wales, and we did a tasting locally with a load of local people tasting blind, 3 whiskies from each country, and I took Penderyn do an incredible port whiskey as well, and they bottled it for when Cardiff got promoted to the Premiership. And the guy who is the managing director, Stephen Davis, he's a Swansea fan, so he really hated having. No, when Swansea got promoted, he did a Swansea bottling, but then he had to do a Cardiff bottling, which he really hated doing. But we tasted it underneath. They said to me, "Well, we've got a male voice. Because this is absolutely true. We've got a male voice choir rehearsing. So why don't you bring your whiskies along and let them taste the whiskies?" And the idea was to see if New Zealand would beat the local thingamajig. And this guy goes, I know this is Penderyn. And I thought, well, you've lost that then. And he still voted for the New Zealand one. And New Zealand won 3-0 in Cardiff against the Welsh, which was a great big thing for Greg, because it's, beating. But I got the pleasure of sitting with a cask strength port cask finished whiskey, watching a male voiced choir in Wales rehearsing. Doesn't get better than that. It's one of those great memories. But yeah, your port cask was just stunning. So
I do remember that one.
I think they do reflect experiences to a great extent. I was talking to you before. I think we went on air about going back, tasting something, going back to the place you're from, and why everything tastes great at the distillery.
Yeah,
but it's a very different experience when you take it home. So, but there are some whiskies you're just straight back there.
But that's kind of love, isn't it? That's when you taste something at home and it takes you to a time and place.
Yeah.
It takes you to that sort of time. It's that experience of saying, oh, well, it's like I'm tasting that whiskey that I tasted when I was on that tour and Cardiff were getting smashed. It's like it's that experience rather than New Zealand were winning again kind of experience, and that's There's no doubt about it. Lefroy cask strength Lefroy always does that. Doesn't matter where I am in the world. If I drink Lefroy, I am straight back on the wind blowing along that coastline and thinking that nothing's changed in all those hundreds of years since the Vikings came down that road. The West Coast. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Love all that.
Yeah. There's something about that, especially that strip just out, the coastline at Lefroy Distillery as well for me. Just that part right there. There's nothing. Yeah. It's just the sea air and you. And it's that. Yeah.
My other one I'll quickly mention. If you've ever had the Bowmore 17-year-old that were a few years back, there was a 17-year-old had a very kind of sort of sweet sort of. I don't know, it was almost like a sody sort of. Apparently it was a mistaken distillation, but the taste was like Parma violets. But it was very, very evocative, and I that was one of the first whiskies I really fell in love with. And to me, what the best experience in my career is sitting on the wall outside Bowmore with a glass of Bowmore, with the sea, with the sun's glinting off Lochindale, and the wind coming into your face, and you're just sitting there, and it's timeless. And you're looking across at Brookladdy,
Yeah.
and it's absolutely timeless. I haven't done that. Do you know what? Sitting here in lockdown, I'm getting quite a little bit emotional, because that's the experience. I think if you could say where we could take you now for half a day, it would probably be there. I think, yeah.
I think,
So
I think if for me it'd be actually not too dissimilar to yours. It'd be in the Grace Cottage up the road from Brookladdy Distillery, which is just like, it's 1 kilometer up the road, so you're just above Brookladdy Distillery, up the hill a bit, and sitting on that back patio of the cottage, enjoying a Brookladdy out the back of the warehouse of Brookladdy was kind of like, can't really beat that. That was, for me, that was like one of those moments. But if I'm being more realistic, I'd go even a pub Palmer and a pint of beer right now. Even if the pub was open, that'd be where I'd prefer to be.
yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
It was actually our Victorian State Manager, Alex Morse, who knows the codes and names very well at the Society, piped up and said 128.4, scrummy, yummy, delish, talking about that Penderyn.
Yeah.
It was called Scrummy Yummy Delish, and it was a 128.4 was the code on it. There you go. That was quick, Alex. That was very quick. Well done.
Yeah, that's very impressive. Yeah.
And Scott writes FWP. He's referring to your Bemore, about that the FWP effect of Bemores.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. I won't say that one out loud because I'm on a Society stream, but French something perfume. There you go. There's a great question here from Matt Wooler, who asks, is there a significant time where you can pin down that whiskey was your way forward? That it became, I guess, it became something that you wanted to pursue a career in, rather than, as you said, you started as a journalist. I mean, it was, and is this something that you saw as your way forward, as your future in it?
No, this is why I say I've been so lucky. I came. In general terms, I think we live in amazing times. Since I was born, we've invented the silicon chip, and we've taken technology into all this. I remember my dad buying a first Commodore PET computer, and he had to enter in binary the program to do a game of Yahtzee on the screen. And if you got one thing wrong, it didn't work. So we've seen all of that happen, and that's happened in my lifetime. So it's an amazing time to live through. We've seen the explosion of whiskey to the time I entered the thing to now. It's been and the great thing about whiskey is, I know that I'm going to surf this wave to the end of my career because it's still happening. And so no, I hadn't even thought about whiskey as a career until I was offered the job as group editor. So I had 4 magazines, but the important one was whiskey. But there was a moment when they invited, and I was well out of my depth. My first day at work, I went to the launch of the Macallan 1824 replica. And this was going to become important because they'd taken a sample and let us taste it. And Michael Jackson said, it tastes surprisingly young for something that was bottled like that. And it turned out it was less than 20 years old, and it was a fake. And that's another story. But at that event was everybody. And Dave Robertson was presenting it. And Dave Robertson is younger than me. And I looked at this master distiller for Macallan, and I was thinking, do you know what? He's 35. That's young. And so we became friends. We're still friends to this day. We go to rock concerts together. We're desperate to get. We've already bought tickets for Red Cross, who's an American band that's coming over in November. We're hoping to be able to go and see them in Glasgow. But we basically remain friends. But that was the magic moment when I saw Dave Robertson and thought, it's not an old man's drink. This is something else. But the real moment came when they did a launch in London of 3 casks, and they were all Bemores from the 60s. And they'd been filled the same. 2 were on the same day. The other was a week difference in November 67 or something like that. And one had been an Oloroso cask, one had been a Pedro Jimenez cask, and one had been a bourbon cask. And we were given these samples to taste this delicious aged whiskey. It's 30-something years old at the time. I don't know how old, 35 maybe even a bit older. And but everybody was there, and I'm well out of my depth. well out of depth. And I'm tasting the bourbon one, and I'm thinking, wow, I'm getting like pineapple and melon. And Michael Jackson says, well, there's the trademark pineapple and melon in this bourbon cask. And I just thought, yeah, I got it. And a light went on. It was like, I can do this. And that's why I say to anybody, don't be fazed by anybody else thinking they know more than you. You've got every right to taste what you taste and the way you taste, as long as you know whether you like it or whether you'd reference it. Everything else doesn't matter, because it's just practice. And to answer the question, that was the moment where I thought, you know what, I can do this. And I don't have, and then if you're doing your job properly, you listen to lots of people who know more than you, and any good journalist just has to ask the right questions, because what you're actually doing is asking the questions you don't know the answers to, and they give you that information for free. Yeah. So that was the start, and of course you never stop learning after that.
It's kind of like, well, that's both points you've made there are very true. You never stop learning, and even it's a short time in the grand scale of things, but I've been working at SMWS now for nearly 5 years, and in that time I'm still learning something every single day, which is I find that fascinating journey in whiskey never ends, and that's the exciting part. But also going back to your first point about asking great questions and listening to those around you and those already in the scene is a huge part of it. Alex Dallenberg and her and I have a very similar trajectory in some ways of learning about whiskey, in that we just threw ourselves into everything and wanted to go to as many tastings and events as possible. Went to every tasting and event you could possibly go to. And that was kind of like, well, because then you get to meet great people and you get to learn so much about what's going on. Was that, apart from you being the lucky guy who got to taste some 60s Bamor, was there a lot of tastings and events and sort of things even then that you were throwing yourself into?
Yeah, well, I basically took any opportunity I could to go to, mainly to Scotland, but also to Ireland. Yeah, and just spend time with distillers. Yeah, when I set up my own business, it was the easiest job in the world, because I'd say, right, there's a distillery in Spain, so I'd contact them and I'd say, look, I'll fly over on EasyJet for £10, and you put me up in a hotel, and we'll go and do a distillery tour, and then I'll write about you for Whiskey Magazine and whatever else. But then we'll go for something to drink and eat. So you end up becoming friends, and then you go home and they've paid for a hotel. That's all they've paid for, and you sell it 3 times. So you've got an income from that, but you've also got a bond with Spain, France, and on it went, and then Australia, and on it went. And yeah, so to answer the question, I did. I had an online magazine for a while, and I'm fiercely competitive. Yeah. And in as much as I don't need to be the best, but any good journalist wants to be the first. So the idea of discovering a new distillery, I used to set my target as going to a distillery Jim Murray hadn't been to before me, and I've managed it a few times now, and I'm very proud of that. Westwood being an example, actually, with Alex. But you see, the thing is, I really feed off their sort of enthusiasm. You know, Alex has all that enthusiasm, and it's a great way to stay enthused, to basically, I will never, I don't think I will ever become indifferent to what I do. I don't think the magic ever goes away, especially after a lock-in like this. But I don't think, and you know this, every experience is different, and the people you meet and you share with, but what you do feel is, the Maori word is iwi. You feel part of a tribe. You have cousins, basically, people who you've met, you share your interests and your love, and there's no arrogance among people. I think it's the most humble. And what became strange was when they started taking the stuff to London and sticking it in an elite bottle and putting it on sale at £20,000 and having a launch in Mayfair and giving you champagne when you arrived and not even a whiskey. And I thought, we've lost the plot somewhere along the line.
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
Fun. That wasn't fun.
Yeah, that is an interesting point. You do see that even down here sometimes. There was a whiskey tasting I went to. I won't say which brand, but they did actually served champagne on arrival, champagne and campais on arrival. And actually, one of my favorite ever stories of a whiskey presentation or launch, I should say, that went wrong was again, I won't say the brand, but they launched their whiskey and no one actually got to taste it on the night. It was more an invitation to look at it.
Yeah, I've done that. Yeah, that was, they were auctioning it for charity, and there's been a big debate about whether a bottle for £100,000 for charity is really £100,000 bottle of whiskey. And Richard Patterson gets into these arguments with the guy David Cox at Macallan, and you think, well, really? But we did exactly that. We went to Mayfair. We're in the centre of Mayfair, a jeweller's or something, and there's this bottle that's lit up in a cabinet, and we were allowed to have a Dutch auction for a miniature. So you put your amount in an envelope and handed it in. I don't think my £5.50 got very far at all. I thought it got up past £5. The extra 50 pence might swing it.
Yeah,
might something like £780 for the miniature, So
yeah, right, yeah. No, the idea. I mean, that's a really interesting point though about how, and this is something you might have a bit more knowledge on, of course, but it's sort of like that whole sort of how whiskey events and how people have interacted at these events over time has changed. And I mean, is that something you've seen change drastically in the UK, or
without a doubt. Without a doubt. Well, there's two answers to that. Without a doubt. But at the same time, there are still fantastic events. The Whisky Show in London, it's organised by Whisky Exchange. That is just a phenomenal show, and you've got all people there from all over the world. So we were filming there a couple of years ago, and I had my photo taken with everybody I interviewed. And I interviewed 30 people, but it was an A to Z of, and I'm not talking about just the big brands. I'm talking about Milk and Honey in Israel was there.
Yeah,
and I spent time with is it Steve Scott?
Well, a big shout out, by the way, to Andy Milne, who's actually watching right now, who was involved with the Whisky Show for many years and worked for Sekinder and all sorts of things.
Yeah, hello.
Hey, Andy. Good to see you, mate. He writes.
Yeah, but so you can still have a very, and do you know what? I met somebody at that show because it's over 2 days of the weekend, and then there's a media day. But he spent his first day just walking around, making a note of where he was going to come back to, so he didn't miss all the key things the following day. Yeah. He spent a day not tasting. But I've stood at that entranceway and started talking, and then realized that I'm still there 6 hours later because you meet everybody there. But at the other end, what's happened is that it's become a luxury item. It started really with, and it's no disrespect to Glenmorangie, but they sold to Louis Vuitton and they became effectively a luxury brand. And then Macallan has gone down that route, and Dalmore obviously has gone down that route. And you start getting these collectible whiskies, and with that came
first release and whatnot.
Yeah, they take on a London PR company, and Samantha Cenas-Jones, always a double-barreled name, who was selling perfume last week and is probably going to be selling, I don't know, underwear next week. This week she's selling whiskey. So her approach to PR is the same as it would be for selling perfume. So what you get are people who know nothing about the liquid. They know nothing at all about what they're selling. Yeah. And they write to you as if, you're very, I'm not arrogant in the slightest, but I find with a name like mine, if the PR girl is talking to me about a bottle of whiskey and she clearly has never even heard of me, then she's not done her homework.
Right.
I've been to events with there was one particular event I went to, and they had a table of quite experienced journalists, whiskey writers.
Yeah.
And they had another table of people who work for lifestyle magazines, and they pitched it at the lifestyle magazines, and it was like entry level. And I'm not. It was your standard tour, and I thought, why did you invite us? You're telling us stuff that there's no point us being here. You're saying things like Jameson is an Irish whiskey. Oh, whoopee-doo. And it's different to Scotch because it's triple distilled. Yeah. Anyway, I have seen a change. I think that, but you can
even now we see that we do see some proper whiskey PR disasters even in Australia when it comes to those kind of whiskey events and that sort of thing. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Like you see, that's what I kind of like about the Australian attitude is that my analogy of knocking over statues. Whiskey doesn't. The attitude of most producers is what is that fuss about? We
Yeah.
just make it, and they can't quite understand how it's got to this point. But it is great because it does attract the people like Alex and yourself and people who can remember that. Luke and there's another one down there, and Greg Ramsey will ring me very late at night because obviously time difference. And we'll have these bizarre conversations. We watched some of the World Cup cricket together last summer.
Right. Yeah.
And the pub let us have a room downstairs where we had it on a big screen. And he brought a load of samples, and we just tasted whiskey in a pub in the centre of Norwich. And those experiences are still what it's all about. Very, very fond memories, So hopefully the likes of you and the Alexes of this world will make sure that we don't get too up ourselves over, expensive whiskies.
Well, I mean, exactly. And I think perception goes a long way in that respect as well. I mean, it's a drink meant to be shared and enjoyed. And you don't often see, this is the problem. I mean, when you do see these companies releasing these 50-year-old malts and 60-year-old malts in extreme crystal decanters with coffin boxes, you often see them and you go, no one's ever going to open that. No one is ever going to open that whiskey. Maybe one bottle will open at the Old Alliance in Singapore, and then the rest will be squirreled away into collections and resold at auction endlessly. And the bottles will travel around the world for the next 100 years, being resold every 3 months. And I kind of think it's almost like that's the antithesis of what whiskey is.
Yeah. And it's like when you get these beautiful packs in the post, and as soon as you get them, it's not a full bottle of whiskey because it's too light.
Yeah.
And your heart sinks, right. And you open it, and it's this most beautiful package thing, and you open the lid, and it's all cut out like foam stuff, and there's a little miniature bottle and a glass, and maybe a bit of wood that was on the barrel originally. And you think, I don't need another whiskey glass. 1, 2. What am I going to do? I'm going to take this out and drink it because I'm tasting it for event. Then I've got an empty box, which I'm going to rip up and put into recycling within 10 minutes. Now, what a waste of money. Just send me the bloody bottle. Simple. Send yourself a fortune. Send me the bottle. Send me in a decant it into a bottle. It's not even the proper bottle. I don't care. But I'd rather have the whiskey than the packaging. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I get that completely, and we're not really interested. We don't have like fancy wooden boxes for our whiskeys. It's the whiskey bottle, and I like that about what we do, and I appreciate.
I knew I was on safe ground for that because obviously you also have a standard sort of format bottle, and it's part of the SMWS thing. But the SMWS is such a fantastic organisation. I'm going to rejoin. I must rejoin. No.
Well, look, I'll help you out with the code to get back in. Don't worry. Actually had a question that came through before we even went live, and it was from a member here in Melbourne, David Phillips, lovely chap who's asked a question because he couldn't tune in live. He's going to watch later, but he says, can you ask a question in advance? What are the 3 whiskey books he would recommend to serious whiskey enthusiasts, brackets excluding his own, several of which I own?
Oh, well, thank you for owning them. It's a very good question. I would say definitely Dave Broom's book, his World Whiskey book. Dave's phenomenal. I always tell a story about Dave. He had his book coming out at the same time as one of my books was coming out, and it was coming out in October for Christmas. And so I rang him up and I said, Dave, I said, are we going to be like fighting for the Christmas #1, like Oasis versus Blur? And he said to me,
That's a very UK reference you made with Oasis versus Blur. Yeah. I was in Blur camp, by the way.
Oh, well, I wasn't. And Dave said, if we are, I'm Blur and you're Liam Gallagher.
Right.
And I've called myself Liam Gallagher of whiskey ever since, because Liam Gallagher is the real common one,
Yeah.
He's a bit of a hooligan, but he's very, very popular, and he should have been headlining Glastonbury this year. So there you go. But Dave definitely, his research, his knowledge, it's everything I'm not really. But there's room for us both. There you go.
I know, absolutely. Okay, so Dave's book is one of them.
Yeah, I still, I know it's not a popular choice. I know what his reputation is and everything else, but it says on the back of the Whiskey Bible, Jim Murray is the best whiskey writer in the world, and that's my quote. And I'm very proud that he put my quote on his book.
Yeah,
probably because I'm the only person who ever said anything nice about him, so it's probably not such a thing. But the Whiskey Bible, because of the work he does for it, and the fact he brings it right up to, he in normal circumstance, he loves cricket, but he rarely gets to play now because he's working. I've stayed with Jim in his house, and it's the weirdest experience I've ever had in my life. He won't let you you can have a steak sandwich, but you can't put hot mustard on it because that affects your palate.
Yeah.
And he eats a lot of fish finger sandwiches, and his son is banned from bringing in girlfriends in case they've got a cold because he can't have downtime. And he tastes, you're not allowed to add water to anything with Jim Murray. And he tastes in rows. He puts, so I happened to be there when he was doing Lefroy, which is fairly safe for me, but he puts them in rows based on strength or age or whatever. And he puts them in a hot water. He puts the glass in hot water and he puts that thing over his head and he noses the aromas coming off from warming the whiskey. And you're not allowed to, and then you've got to spit everything. You're not allowed to swallow anything. And I thought I'd discovered a way of actually tasting whiskey without tasting it. But what I found was you get all the aromas, but as Morecambe Wise would say, but not necessarily in the right order. And because the most volatile alcohols come off first, you don't get a balanced nosing from warming it in hot water. So I don't know how he does it. But he also, at the time, had a house with no furniture in it, none whatsoever. And except for one cupboard, which was full of Millwall programs. And the reason for it was he bought himself out of the contract because you sign away your copyright when you write a book most of the time these days.
Yeah.
And he found out that when he asked for a pay rise for the Whiskey Bible, they said no. So he said, right, I'm not doing it then. Next thing he hears, there's a guy going around saying, my name's John Smith, I'm working for the Whiskey Bible. And all the publishers did was recruit people to do the tastings for him. So
right.
So it was the Jim Murray Whiskey Bible, but he'd sold the name. So he went to court, and over a long legal battle, he got control of his name. And it's why he's an absolute nightmare to work with. If you put him, I got him to write a foreword for one of my books, but it was a nightmare because he wanted copyright for every territory that book went into. No publisher will do that. Anyway, at one point I went into a bathroom and I turned the tap and I just heard him shout, "Don't turn the tap on." And as I did, I said, I won't. And as I did, the tap fell off and the water started scooching up into the... So I'm trying to get the top back on. It was a brass tap and it's hot water. And it's getting... And he goes, "You've taken the tap off, haven't you?" I said, "No, I haven't." It's all... The house was falling apart. But the reason he had no furniture and he wasn't doing any repairs was because he very morally decided he lent a lot of money to get through the court case. And he wouldn't invest in anything until he'd repaid all his creditors. So his attitude, whatever you think of him, his obsession makes it worth supporting. And then the third one is, then after that, there's any number of whiskey books. There are a lot. If you're going to go down the Japanese route, there's Stefan van Aitken and Dave Broom again. But there's a great book by Finn O'Connor on pot still whiskey in Ireland. He's a good friend of mine, and there's a new book coming out on Ireland. So you can now find books. Chuck Cowdery over in America, Lou Bryson, But the one I would pick to answer the question is the Malt Yearbook, Ingvar's book.
I love it. I love the Malt Yearbook. I buy a copy every year. I think it's fantastic.
Absolutely. I remember him walking into the Whiskey magazine offices when I was the editor and coming up with this proposal and talking to Damien Riley Smith, who's the publisher of Whiskey magazine, about the idea of doing this yearbook. And none of us ever thought anything would come of it. And yet there he is. He will go well late. He turns that around. It's as fresh as you can get. There's normally a 6-month delay with a book because they send it off to China to be printed and then it has to be shipped back. And then it sits in a warehouse for 3 months before they release it. And a book 6 months old in this day and age is out of date. Simple as that.
Yeah.
So Ingvar's book is just phenomenal. And his approach is very Swedish. It's very meticulous. And I've written a few chapters for the entry, and it's just a pleasure to get that book. So they're the three, and maybe they're not very.
They're great. And they're very, very valid picks. And that was, of course, we were looking for 3 that weren't your own because, as David said, he's already got a lot of your books. So he's looking for what the whiskey authors' selections would be, which is a bit of an insight. And I'll certainly agree with I'll agree with all of those. Dave's a great writer, and Jim is quite. I mean, even in Australia, Jim is quite. It's sort of a love him or hate him kind of character, even in Australia. I mean, I think you know what I'm talking about. He has that effect. And then there's, of course, the malt whiskey yearbook is a staple, and so it should be.
We just a quick story. I've only done one event with him, and it was in the Philippines, in Manila, and we were marched in as guests of honor, and Jim had his hat on, and he did a few words about what a pleasure it is to be in the Philippines and an exciting new whiskey market. And then it got to me, and I said, ladies and gentlemen, I said, you're very, very privileged, because for the first time ever in the history of whiskey, you have the best two whiskey writers in the world on the same stage.
Yeah.
It was just silence. And then I said, no, I'm only joking. He's not that good. I don't think he's ever forgiven me.
That's quite a story. That's fantastic. There was a comment from Brooke Heyman, and Brooke is the co-owner of Whiskey and Ailment in Melbourne. She writes, on the previous topic where we're talking about distilleries, can we ask Dominic which 3 distilleries are on his to-visit list once the lockdowns lift that he maybe hasn't been to before?
Okay, that's a very good question too, blimey. Hi, Brooke. I included the Whiskey and Ailment in my Whiskey Japan book. I didn't visit. I did it remotely. I had to pick 20 bars, so I'm aware of what they do down there. So hi. 3 I would like to visit. That's an incredibly difficult question. I could probably name 10 in Tasmania alone. I'm desperate to get back there. So, but that aside, I won't necessarily name names because I wouldn't want to separate them out really. I would love to go to the distillery Alazana in Argentina. Mainly because it's a place that fascinates me anyway, but they've now been going a few years. So I haven't tasted their whiskey since it turned whiskey at 3 years old. And that must be 7 or 8. I don't know. I don't even know if it's still there, but that would be one. I'd like to go. This is a cheat because I have been there, but I haven't seen it fully operational. And I certainly haven't seen it in its modern guise. And that's Milk and Honey in Tel Aviv.
Yeah, I'd love to check that out as well.
Yeah, Toma brought me over to Whiskey Live Israel twice. And I haven't been back for a few years, but what they've done is quite incredible, and their distillery is right in the center of Tel Aviv as well. Tel Aviv is the most. I don't know if you've been, but it's all food and drink, and it's incredibly exciting. And it's also edgy because there are times where they sit in a bar and watch Palestinian missiles hit their defense screen, and Tel Aviv is very liberal. I've got my political views. I believe in the two-party state. I'm not going to do that now, but I've always been honest with my Israeli friends. I don't totally support what their government's doing, but these guys are enthusiastic. Their thirst for knowledge is incredible. Their progress has been incredible. And
is it still in a garage, or have they upgraded since? That's one of the follow-up questions to that.
Yeah, it isn't. Well, I don't know because I haven't visited it, but it was. They were opening it into this garage area, and just off an industrial site in the center of by the sports stadium in the center of Tel Aviv. So I don't know the answer to that. It's a good question actually. I ought to go ask Tomo, get in touch with him again because I haven't spoken to him for a long time. I noticed he's on a World Whiskey panel this weekend. He's quite a shy guy. He's come on as well because he didn't like doing interviews. He didn't like being in the public eye because he's just too shy for it. But he's doing a weekend panel, something to do with the Whiskey Exchange. Oh no, Masters and Malt. They're doing some whiskey day thing this weekend. I think Toma's involved with that. But that would be my second. And then my third, do you know, this is going to sound terrible.
No, go for it.
It's lakes in the northwest of England. I've been in touch with them since the day they started, and I've talked to them, I've written about them, I've tasted their whiskies, and I've never been. And it's the most beautiful part of the world. It's unfortunately the worst place for the virus at the moment because everyone's got second homes there and they've all moved up. And
right.
Everyone's gone there thinking they can go on holiday and they've just given them the virus. But they've got a very pretty and increasingly interesting distillery in terms of the whiskey they're producing. Their master distillers obviously doing something very right. So that'd be my three. Apart from any other one, I'd love to go back to New Zealand.
Yeah.
I'd love to go and see what Greg's doing down there. I think I keep seeing pictures of stills arriving and etc. I don't know if they're actually producing spirit yet, but they were going to turn that site down at Christchurch or Oamaru into a functioning distillery. So I'd love to do that. So that'd be the answer. It's a very good question.
Yeah, there's been some great questions tonight, and I want to thank everyone for shooting all those questions through. Dominic, I feel like you're the kind of guy where we could talk until the cows come home, because there's just so much to cover off, and there's you've got so many amazing stories. So I'm going to use this opportunity before we finish up to ask you, would you like to come back on another live stream soon?
No, you're kidding. No, I'm joking.
Whoa, almost had me. Yeah.
No, I'd love to.
I really appreciate it.
It's a real pleasure. And as I say, I'm deeply disappointed that I'm not going to be back down there this year, because the Tasmanian Festival is almost certainly called off. I mean, you're in lockdown until September in terms of overseas flights. It's not happening. I'm deeply disappointed. You know, my diary had two big events in August. One was going to South America for Le Mondial Cordials judging, and then the other was Tasmania. So I'd love to. Pleasure. And I love the questions. They're great.
Thank you so much. And it was Bill McHenry who pulled me aside at Mona last year and said, "Oh, we're getting Dominic in for next year. I want you on the panel. I want you and Dominic on this panel and a few others." And I'm like, "Yeah, count me in." And then I was like, I'm so excited. I'm going to get to meet you in August, and I don't think it's going to happen now, but I'm glad we're able to connect here at least at this time. And again, thank you to everyone who asked so many great questions and for joining in tonight. A good crowd tonight has been fantastic. So my thanks again. I'll see you. I'll catch you sooner rather than later, of course. And I'd love to have you on again if you don't mind.
Yeah. Please stay in touch, Matt, and thank you so much for having me on. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dominic. You stay safe. Of course, everyone, just to let everyone know, the next live stream is, of course, tomorrow night, which is a collaborative one with Dram Nation. We're going to be talking about some wild turkey, among other stuff. And then Friday night is, of course, the Tassie Whiskey Roundtable kind of setup, which is all coming together nicely. So bits and bobs here to go. Once more, big thanks to Dominic Roskrow for joining us tonight. Thank you so much, Dom. I'll see you soon.
Yes, thank you. See you.